get this thing popping. Hit the like, please. All right, guys. Bellator 4, PFL 1. That was the score for Bellator. Great night overall for Bellator, right? As their athletes shine in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. However, in the title fights, they did go 1-1. So Littleface was saved at the end to avoid the sweep, courtesy of Renan Fajeda's quick win over Ryan Bader in the main event. What was your reaction, guys, to the lopsided outcome of the super fights? We go to you for the first take this week.
Man, I was excited for this pay-per-view, but what we were presented with day one when they made the announcement was a lot different than what we got on Saturday, right? If you look at some of the matchups that we lost, Magomed Karamov, Jesus Pinedo, even if you really think about it, like OAM has been such a big representative for the PFL that not having those fighters sort of hurt them on the night of, right? If you look at some of the matchups, I think they just could have been a little bit more competitive. I still think maybe Bellator would have come up on top, but I don't think it would have been this landslide that we witnessed over the weekend, right? If you look at some of those performances, man, like AJ McKee, he just looked like he was a whole step above Clay Collard. That was such an important victory for him, and so quick that he was able to do that and dominant. And then you look at Nemkov, he looked like an absolute monster. Jason Jackson looked terrific. Yes, Ray Cooper, he was filling in on short notice, but he's won tournaments in the past. Like he was a pretty strong representative in the past for the PFL. So things didn't really work out too well. You look at Impa Kasanganay. I thought he had a pretty strong performance and may have let that one slip away over Johnny Evelyn. Johnny Evelyn, again, he's shown us that he can kind of go through adversity a little bit, change things in his game and come back and get the win. But that was a tough out for him. The only bright side there was just that main event. And I think, I don't know, had things gone PFL's way, I just don't know, man. Like, I still think overall Bellator kind of proved they were the better product. But you never know. There could be some more matchups later on, and maybe they could save a little bit of face that way. But at the end of the day, I think we're all just going to judge it on this one night.
Mm-hmm. All right, Matt, what were your thoughts on the event? The lopsided 4-1 win for Bellator, man. They almost broomed them, if not for Fajeda.
Yeah, they almost did. And I think the main event, with, like, as you just mentioned, Fajeda, I think that was the most easiest predictable one for me, because I saw that one coming a mile away. Like, Ryan Bader's always had trouble with that style of fighter, and he sparked him quickly and made it look easy. So that wasn't too much of a surprise. But for the rest of the card, man, I thought PFL would put up a better showing. I liked the co-main event. Johnny Evelyn and Impa was a good fight. And that was a particular fight that made me wish that these championship fights, these, whatever they're going to call them for the super belt with the ring inside, which is cool, by the way. I like that design. I think that's pretty dope. But I wish these fights were 5 rounds. Like, it felt like after Evelyn and Kasanganay fight, I was like, I need 2 more rounds of this. It was a solid fight. It could have been, a much more talked about fight with 2 more rounds. It could have been one of, those classic fights that we talk about at the end of the year, like fight of the year candidate, sort of thing. But, Bellator did what I expected him to do, man. I mean, they're just better across the board, I think. You already mentioned AJ McKee, fantastic performance. He completely shut down Clay Collard before he could get going. And that was my question going into that fight. I was like, how is AJ going to handle Clay Collard's volume, and his willingness to just stay in the pocket and trade? Nope, didn't get to see any of that. AJ McKee just wrapped him up and submitted him before any of that could get started. So it was just an impressive performance for Bellator across the board. But the event as a whole, I think it was a good starting point for this sort of thing. They say they're going to do it every year. I hope that's true, because I like things, with the presentation aspect of it, even though there were a lot of rocky moments on the prelims. They had audio issues throughout. Like, they kept going to the guys for the betting angles, and their audio was just not working until, like, the main card. Like, they kicked it to them 2 or 3 times, complete silence. When Clarissa Shields walked out, the camera people were focusing on some other random lady rocking down the aisle instead of Clarissa Shields. A lot of weirdness on the prelims, but once they got to the main card, the pacing was great, which is a big gripe for PFL broadcasts, is always the pacing. Yeah, that was present again on the prelims, but not when they got to the main card. It was like, boom, it felt like a UFC event. Everything felt fluid, felt smooth. So I think as a whole, it was a good starting point. But I know that PFL, at the end of the day, leading into that main event, Don Davis and Pete Murray had to be looking at each other like, I don't know if we want to do this again, because we're looking pretty bad on the PFL side for the scoreboard. But solid start. And if they do it all, again, as a yearly thing, I'm intrigued to see what it looks like next year, especially with the matchups.
You ain't lying, Matt. Every time both of those gentlemen had to step in there with Ray Sefo, you could just tell they were uncomfortable, wishing it was more evened up, man. And again, Fajeda, even the score, the title fight score, which was originally going to be 4 title fights, but at least they saved a little face there. It was the main event. It was the lasting impression, but I've seen it all over socials. We're seeing it here in the chat, and I'll get to that as well. Bellator, greater than PFL, so it's quite a hit. But Danny, let's go to your thoughts. What did you think of the outcome of these matchups? It was lopsided.
Yeah, I'm going to pull off an Nate Diaz here and say I'm not surprised, motherfuckers, because, on paper, if you just look at both rosters, I felt like we've already had the answer to what promotion had the better roster, and that was Bellator by a long shot. Now, I do think that the PFL was doing things better, and maybe that's why, before the sale, a lot of people were debating that number 2 spot being for PFL just because they're an ESPN Plus, they're more visible, they seem to be investing a lot more in the marketing. But as far as who had the most talented roster, I have no doubt it's Bellator. And I think, the record proves my theory and a lot of people's theories. I agree with Matt. I don't think this is a good look for PFL now, especially because they're keeping both brands separate. If they were going to do a merger, you go, well, the Bellator fighters look great, but now they're PFL fighters. So PFL fighters overall look great, right? But now you're going to keep these 2 different promotions running. And basically, you just pretty much announced to the world that the 8 series events of Bellator, that's kind of like the premier product. And all of a sudden, the PFL regular season bouts and all this don't look as great, or are maybe a tier below. So not a great result for PFL. Ideally, I think you want to blend in both rosters and really embrace the Bellator fighters and be like, these are our guys now. This is exactly why we signed them, because they're legit. Now we have a great roster rather than keeping both brands separate. But yeah, we'll see how this all unfolds. I know it's very new. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of changes in the future. But in terms of your original question, George, I am not surprised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well put. And I hadn't thought of it like that, Danny. I'm going back to the Raw and SmackDown days of them separating the talent and then people running to say which one they would prefer or whatever. So it will be interesting to watch the 8 events this year, and if it will be put up on a pedestal, I guess, because of this. What do you think, Goes? How long can it take PFL to dig out of this kind of hole? Like, will it take a few matchups or a specific matchup where maybe all of a sudden we're just kind of leaving that alone, the whole Bellator greater than PFL?
I think it might take a minute. Even a specific matchup, like let's just say, right? Francis Ngannou to us is like, he's never even fought for the PFL. So like, even if he were to go in there and let's say he gets past Ferreira and he fights another Bellator guy, like, it's not really going to matter too much. But, I will say this though, man, I got to applaud them for even doing it this way, because a lot of people wouldn't put themselves out there to go head to head with another organization. We actually had this go down in our studio one time, George. I don't know if you remember, with Andrew Simon, where a question just kind of came out and they put together two organizations fighting against each other. It's not easy to do. And you take a chance, like Danny said, like, it didn't really look too well for the PFL. I think maybe they could gain a little face here and there, but I think at the end of the day, everything gets judged on this one night.
Yeah. Matt, what do you think, man? Like, should they even worry about it? Danny really made a good point there about the whole, like, why are we tuning into the B squad versus, the A squad? Or I don't know, man. I'm still trying to unpack just that one thought. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they can get some momentum back, depending on how they go with this going forward, because it was a surprising sort of thing to hear on the broadcast saying like, hey, we're going to do this again next year sort of thing. And, it's just like, okay, well, you're like Danny said, like, you just proved that Bellator has a clear edge, but PFL does have fighters under their banner that could show up at this event next year that can make things a little bit more interesting. again, it just depends on how the matchups play out and who's available and whatnot and all that sort of thing. I mean, it's just one of those weird things, though, that right out of the gate, you almost get swept. It's not a good look. You know, I don't know. I don't know where they can go from here, but I do want to point out one comment before we get too far off of this about the presentation stuff, since I highlighted on it. Crisco Wild in the chat there said, you know, PFL versus Bellator had a whole half hour of nothing at the start of the prelims before the first fight, and I hated that. Man, I had to pull off this and, you know, dust off the good old WTF button here for this, because they did not broadcast the beginning of the show as a pre-show. They said noon, fights are starting. We had to sit there for 49 minutes before the opening bell of a fight started. Absolutely ridiculous. And I need PFL to start respecting people's time, because that is just like insane. Call it a pre-show. Say fights are going to start, or at least the lead into the fight's going to start at 12:30. Like, why are you going to have people sitting here for damn near an hour expecting fights to start, and you're just giving us repeat filler? It wasn't new filler. It was like 10 minutes filler, and then we're going to go back to the previous thing we already talked about. And then it was a mess, man. The prelims were a complete mess. I know I had a lot of good things to say about the main card, but I was pretty pissed at the prelims, presentation-wise.
Yeah, pacing's so important. That's why I'm a big fan of bare knuckle, the way they throw it at you. You get to the fights you want to see real quick, and along the way, if there's a gem, it's like, okay, you know, gravy, right? But here's a few other comments from the chat. Like Matt pointed out, you can participate in the show via Facebook or YouTube. You know, we're broadcasting on both platforms. So if you write something there, the better ones, the better comments and questions, the better substance, right? We'll use it here on the show. Here's a good one. Michael Panza says, Jason Jackson is a beast. He's trained with killers for years. Nice to see him getting some love. I'll shout out Michael Panza because that's a sharp comment right there. Jason Jackson's part of Kill Cliff, and think about all the welterweights they've had over there over the years, starting with Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns. Ian Gary made a pit stop there, Vicente Luque. So yeah, that is where Jason Jackson honed his skill. And shout out to Jason Jackson for really turning things around. Shafkat, how could I forget him? You're right. He's really turned things around, Jason Jackson, man. Really nice turnaround for him. Josh Wallace in the chat says, Bader's not a true heavyweight. And Bellator heavyweights have always been trash, so that title fight doesn't say anything to me, but sets up Ngannou matchup nicely. I wouldn't go that far. I think Bader filled in nice from his 205 frame, the heavyweight frame. He's won the title. He's defended it. He's 42, and he ran into a 6'8" freight train in Renan Ferreira. So that might be a bit much, Josh. Now, you're right. The history of that weight class hasn't been the most impressive. Maybe they got Fedor a little bit too late, but how about I shut up and we go to Danny, because the panelists are the stars of the show and he's got something to say. Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, I just have to read a little bit of Jason Jackson's current win streak, because I feel like he's probably one of the most underrated fighters today. Look at his current win streak. First of all, he hasn't lost since 2019. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fight win streak right now, and it includes some of these names: Jordan Mean, Benson Henderson, Naaman Gracie, Paul Daly, Douglas Lima, Amosov, and now Ray Cooper III. Dude, I'm not out here calling Jason Jackson the best welterweight in the world, but damn, that's a sturdy resume right there. And I would consider him among the best. And I would say he's one of the least talked about, one of the most underrated talents right now in MMA.
So Cooper's a former champ of a major belt. Amosov was undefeated, also a champ. Lima was a champ as well. And who were the other names? Daly was a long time contender.
Daly, Naaman Gracie, who fought for a title. Benson Henderson, former UFC champion. Jordan Mean, pretty solid name.
Let's not forget he was on Contender Series and he had that ankle injury. Imagine what could have happened if that didn't go down.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. Okay. One last thing I'll say. I wore a PFL hat last week, so I will take my medicine. I thought somehow they'd pull off a 3-2 or whatever. But this is what I said last week, and this is my last defense for PFL, because they got to take this L properly. They did get beat up pretty bad, right? 4-1. But right here, there's a comment that says, from Frozen Like Elsa, it was a big missed opportunity for the PFL, and Bellator was truly a B-League card with a half-empty arena. Well, sorry, I must have misread. I think they are trying stuff and they got partners out there, and so good on them. I'm okay with it. What I was going to say was, as much as we're going to beat up on them, MMA is this sport that goes from week to week, and then we have these short memories. But remember, a lot of UFC guys have gone to the PFL and gotten served up. So we've tipped our hat to them before. They'll take the L now, but it doesn't mean that they're way down here and Bellator's way up there. I think it was just a night of fights. Let's see how the year plays out, and maybe we'll revisit this.